Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have kids, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome, glad to have you here. Oh look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure?
It's cultist coffee.
What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome to the office. Welcome to the morning grind. I'm Heath. I'm your host. Today we're going to be talking about wilderness travel again, specifically taking a look at the second part of the Angry GM's article on how to get travel right in RPGs. We looked at the philosophy and theory behind all of it yesterday. It was a very long article. We got to the point where we were getting to the implementation of it and how he was actually changing travel in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Pathfinder in order to adhere to his philosophy of travel, which I think, by and large, I was in favor of. Because we were looking for new rules for travel that could particularly be integrated into a short game. That was kind of my purpose. I mean, of course, you can do this with longer games too. I was like, how do we make travel interesting, but also get it done in a short way that has a lot of impact at the table so that you can go on and explore whatever location it is that you're trying to explore inside of one session. Good morning, Zero the Blade. Good morning, James. Good morning. And Michael, hail lobster, unbreaded. Unbreaded. All right. So let me bring this up over here. Let's see. Is there anything else I was supposed to talk about this morning? I had been working. I've got to finish a bunch of different things. Administratively, I was working to make more clips of our table talk conversations for either short feeds, or even I may experiment with TikTok. I may go over and try to put, because I've made them, so it seems like if they're going to be made, they should go out to any type of social media that can take that kind of material. So maybe that means that TikTok should be done too. We will see. I don't know anything about TikTok. We will see. Might be a fun experiment, though, and report back later how well it does. Okay, so I'm using my gigantic new monitor, which I still love. Let's bring this up. How to actually handle travel. Here we are. Okay, here we are. So, I keep changing. Oh, here we go. Okay. I kept resizing and it would go. Okay. How to actually handle travel. So time, danger, navigation, resources, and discoveries. Those are the factors to consider. And he went over each one of those previously, and we did last time. Time, and I think time is so important. Danger, navigation, resources, and discoveries. Those are the factors to consider. How the frack do you get to actually handle travel in your D&D game? How do you make it interesting? How do you keep track of everything? How do you make travel part of the adventure? Well, here's how, he says. To map or not to map? Let me see if I can increase the size. That's probably easier for you to see. Good morning, Lynn. Take this map, for example. Sorry for the crappy quality, but hey, I'm trying to make a point about not sweating the quality anyway. So here we have our map here. Lake of Obstacles, Hills of Ancient Ruins, the Goblin Woods. All right, that's our map. Let's say the adventure is about getting from Onnet to Tucson. So from here to up there, okay? I could measure this out. I could measure this all to scale and figure out how the terrain slows down travel and all of that crap. Or I can just fudge it. The map offers 3 basic routes: directly through the Goblin Wood, along the road, or through the Hills of Ancient Ruins. And those represent the choices the party can make. It's just like choosing 3 doors. In fact, the party could also choose to shave some time off the road by leaving the road and traveling north of the lake, and I can figure out roughly how long each route would take. The road might take 10 days. The path through the Goblin Wood might take 4 days, accounting for the slowdown of the terrain. The hill might take 7 days, and that's just the baseline. I don't even have to show the party the map. I could just explain they can travel directly through the Goblin Woods and get there in 4 days, but they will have to manage a river crossing. That can follow a long winding road. They can follow a long winding road that will take 10 days, or they can follow an old road into the Hills of Ancient Ruins and then cut north once the old road gives out until they hit the river ford. That whole trek will take 7 days. That gives them enough information to choose their route, at least based on time. Once you start tracking the party's movement, you can just eyeball as best you can on the fraction of time traveled, or just narrate the trip. Mapping accurately is not super important. Designing routes or designing a map. Before you can run an interesting travel game, the first thing you have to do is create the wilderness through which the party will be traveling. And you can do that in one of 2 ways. You can either design a few different routes the party can choose from, or you can draw a map. As noted above, the map doesn't have to be accurate by any stretch. It just has to show the relative distances and where the different types of terrain are. Either way, you're looking to figure out 5 things. How long is the route? How dangerous is each route or each section? How easy is the route to navigate or each section? What's the available resources along each route or each section? And how likely is the party to get sidetracked by an interesting discovery on the route? Before I launch into specific mechanics, let me explain that I like to grade each of these things on a 5-point scale. First of all, danger is measured from 1 to 5. Okay, this sounds like a way to concretize and gamify these variables. Because you can, if you've got some kind of scale like this, I can totally see this being integrated into a broader game. 1 is a relatively safe, civilized region or a barren, desolate region. 2 is a dangerous frontier. 3 is enemy territory. 4 is regularly patrolled, extremely hostile territory. And 5 is reserved for some sort of terrain which is filled with monsters that are actively trying to destroy all intruders and can detect intruders with a supernatural means. For example, Hell or the Land of the Dead. Seriously, 4 and 5 are pretty ridiculously dangerous. You'll see why. Navigation and resources are both measured in terms of a DC, but either can be moot. For example, following a road or river makes navigation moot. A trend traveling through civilized, friendly farmland makes resources moot. Otherwise, you want to set a DC of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, etc. in D&D 5e, or a DC of 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, etc. in D&D 3e, 4e, and Pathfinder. Verdant forests and lush meadows have a resource DC of 5 or 10. Deserts have a resource DC of 25 or 30. Gently rolling flatlands have a navigation DC of 5 or 10. And a desert has a navigation DC of 25 or 30. If you want to add a fantasy factor like confounding air curses or the blessing of the land spirits, you can adjust the DCs by 5 either way. Got it? All right, let's talk about how all this plays out. Choosing a route. Obviously, the first step in traveling is choosing the route. The players need to somehow find out what the lay of the land is and learn any interesting details about the route in question. They should have a rough idea of how long the route is and how dangerous, how difficult to navigate, and how difficult it is to forage, because they're going to need to plan their food supplies accordingly, which I'm big on, which is a problem if you get lost. Presumably, they will have access to a map or local knowledge or research. As the GM, it's your job to find out ways to get this information in front of your players. As far as discoveries, you can use them as a way to entice the players along a particular route, or just vaguely hint or leave it as a surprise. Discoveries mainly come up as a way to drive choices along the way. Now, the party doesn't have to know everything. Partway through the trip through a forest, they can encounter signs that they are passing into goblin territory, or cursed land, or something they can make a decision then and there about whether or not to pass into the new territory, or whether to try to go around and even retreat to a different route. Those sorts of surprises can help add decisions to a longer trip. At this point, it's important for you, the GM, to know how long the route should take in days, which is what the One Ring skipped. It was about how long the route will take in the number of hexes. But the One Ring has the advantage, as I said, that it has a setting, obviously, Middle Earth, that it can that it's always going to be played in. So it can specify, here's the map, which is really nice for everyone. You get that specified, and you get that specified in hexes that the travel system uses. Then later you could come back to it and figure out, well, how many days was I actually traveling, and do that backwards. But that's how you'll be tracking things, not in miles, but in days. So the Angry GM is in favor of tracking things in days. The travel day. Once the party sets out, it's time to resolve each day of travel. At the beginning of the day, the party decides what kind of pace to set, slow, medium, or fast. I also liked that. He said that was something from Dungeons and Dragons that they brought in, slow, medium, or fast. And there are penalties or bonuses or whatever based on each one. At a slow pace, the party is moving carefully and quietly. They gain advantage or a +4 bonus to all checks to perceive danger, and all hostile creatures suffer disadvantage or a -4 penalty to detect the party, thus allowing the party to surprise enemies. In addition, the party can forage for food normally if they maintain a slow pace for the entire day. Finally, navigation checks enjoy advantage or a +4 bonus when moving at a slow pace. The party's speed, however, is reduced by 1/3. So every 3 days of travel counts as only 2 days of travel. At a medium pace, the party moves normally. They may forage for food with disadvantage or a -4 penalty. At a fast pace, the party travels more quickly. Their speed is increased by 1/3. So every 3 days of travel counts as 4. When traveling at a fast pace, the party cannot forage for food at all. They suffer disadvantage or a -4 penalty on all checks to perceive danger and on navigation checks. Hostile creatures enjoy advantage or +4 bonus on checks to attract the party. Once the party has set the pace for the day, they can change the pace based on what happens to them during the day. Don't worry, you'll resolve all of that stuff at the end of the day. Now pick up 6-sided dice. Now, we already I remember what it was that we looked at with the Angry GM earlier. It was the time in dungeons and keeping pressure on people. And he was using dice to do that, the time pool or the danger pool, I forget exactly what it was called. So here we are back to 6-sided dice. He likes those. Now pick up six six-sided dice. Each one represents a time period of the day: morning, afternoon, evening, dusk, midnight, and pre-dawn. Roll them all. For each one that shows the danger number or less, an encounter might happen. We'll talk about random encounters. For example, if the danger is 3 and your dice show 5, 2, 3, 4, 1, 6, the party will have 3 encounters that day. That's quite a bit. 1 in the evening, 1 at dusk, and 1 at pre-dawn. Notice the danger number is actually the number of encounters you will expect to happen in one day. Oh, okay. So that's why he's doing that, because we had a danger number, which was from 1 to 5. And that's why we're saying that 5 is extremely dangerous, because you're going to be talking about the number of encounters. And in Dungeons & Dragons, of course, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you're expected to have a lot of encounters during the day. Now, this is what I was changing up. I was saying that what if you get 1 travel encounter, and that travel encounter needs to be in the most dangerous location, and the most dangerous or significant encounter that you could have along that route, if you're trying to pare it down. But yes, so that would be why 5 would be extremely dangerous. Note, so the danger number is actually the number of encounters you will expect to happen in a day. Because if you're rolling 6 dice and you're trying to roll a 1, you'd be expecting 1 encounter a day. Finally, roll 1 more d6. If that shows the discovery number or less, you need to tantalize the party with something interesting off the road for them to check out. A ruined tower, a sign of magic, an old tomb, an ancient hinge, a shrine, or whatever. The key is that it has to be far enough off the path the party has to choose whether or not to waste a few hours investigating it or to ignore it. Now you play out the daytime encounters as they happen. For each encounter, the party might spend some time resting, recovering, or whatever. Don't worry about that. They might decide to change their pace. That's fine too. When playing out the encounters, it's important to remember that surprise is a definite possibility. If the party is moving slowly and quietly and the enemy doesn't detect them, they should be able to plan an ambush or bypass the encounter. If the party is rushing, they might very well be surprised and ambush themselves. In fact, it's entirely possible that neither party detects the other and the encounter never happens. That's totally fine. Sometimes that's just how it goes, and that's why we roll dice. If no encounter or discoveries happen, the day passes uneventfully and the PCs find a place to make camp for the night. James says, I know tabletop RPGs are also about adventuring and discovery, but not just about weaving a narrative. But this feels like it's trying to force interest and focus where none naturally exists. James says, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I quite liked the One Ring and how it handled journeying. See, I do question okay, this is the discovery number on, do you find something that you should go and check out? And potentially, the key is that's be far enough the path the party has to choose whether or not to waste a few hours investigating it or to ignore it. One of the issues sometimes with random encounters, whether that is a monster or some kind of creature or creature encounter, or if it's some type of old tomb, interesting site encounter, that if it's not important to the narrative, right, then don't distract the players by it. I mean, especially if you're crunched for time. If you're trying to do an adventure in 3 hours, you may not want to distract your players with something they may think is very important, but that is actually not. And it's just something that was determined by the dice. Now, I'm sure that Angry GM talks about that too. But in a situation where you have a lot more time and you can afford to, hey, let's go check out whatever this thing is over here. You may not, that can be fine. But otherwise, you don't want the players to get distracted by things that appear to them to be significant, but actually aren't. And in fact, here, if you're only if the choice is to waste a few hours investigating or ignore it, it seems like the right decision is to ignore it. But then again, it might not be, because you might spend the few hours investigating and you might find some really neat magical treasure or something. But you can also put the magical treasure in the adventure location. James says, and it's not like the journey isn't part of the story. Good morning, Robert. Good morning. Lynn says, looks to me like it's gamifying a usually boring or frustrating part of a wilderness adventure. Zero the Blade says, this is creating a random mini quest that can offer a reward, but yeah, time is a factor that has to be considered. All right, making camp. It's time for some bookkeeping at this point. First of all, you'll have to find out if the party is lost. To do this, have the best navigator make a navigation roll. That's kind of like, I guess, the guide in the One Ring RPG. To do this, have the best navigator make a navigation roll against a DC of the terrain. If the party traveled at a fast pace at any point during the day, apply disadvantage or a -4 penalty. Make this roll in secret. If they fail, the party has gotten lost at some point during the day. They just don't know it yet. Now, you have to figure out how many days of travel the party logged during the day. If the party isn't lost, this is determined by their pace. They either log 2/3, 1, or 1 1/3 days, depending on the slowest pace they move during the day. If the party has now logged enough days to finish their route, they will reach the destination tomorrow. If the party stopped to investigate a discovery, subtract 1/3 from their progress unless they spent the whole day on the discovery, in which case they make no progress. Use your best judgment. Likewise, use your best judgment if the party does something weird, like stopping halfway through the day. Finally, you have to figure out how much food and water the party has consumed. If the party moved at a slow pace all day, allow them to make a check against the forage DC. If the party didn't move slowly all day, but never moved at a fast pace at all, have each make a forage check with disadvantage or a -4 penalty. If someone fails, that means the party didn't find enough food to feed themselves. Each failure requires someone to consume 1 pound of food from their supply, 1 day's worth of rations. And I would just call that a day's worth of rations. And I would actually, if that's important, I would probably make that a physical token that they need to count down. Here's what you need to pay attention to. Here's your resource for this element of the adventure. Here are your either some type of meeple type token, or you could do it with a card. I like cards. Each failure requires someone to consume 1 pound of food from their supply, 1 day worth of rations. You can generally assume that as long as anyone succeeds in foraging, the party turned up enough water to refill their water skins and drink their fill. But if they are traveling through a desert, you can modify that. If everyone fails to forage, however, they drain their water skins and are now out of water. If their water skins were already drained and they don't have a backup supply, they are now dehydrating. The whole process should be pretty quick. You roll for navigation and determine if they are lost, and then mark off the progress if they aren't. Then everyone rolls a forage check and marks off food. Done and done. Now it's time for the night. The night. Some groups get absolutely bogged down in details about who is taking what shift and when. This is completely ludicrous. Now, we've looked at the Hackmaster rules for being on watch, and if you fall asleep on watch, we might have to bring those back out. But the most complicated rules for that I have ever seen are in Hackmaster, and it gets a lot of modifiers if you're on watch and determining whether or not you're able to stand watch or if you end up going to sleep, falling asleep on watch. Okay, so some groups get very bogged down on that. This is completely ludicrous. It really doesn't matter. There are enough hours in the night that a party of any size can all get a good night's sleep and still have a watch rotation with each character taking a shift. If the party really wants to fight about it, or someone refuses to take a watch, or someone takes extra shifts because they are an elf and require less sleep, fine. So be it. But otherwise, just assume that everyone takes a watch sometime. Now, you play out the nighttime encounters. Remember the possibilities for detection and ambush. Roll randomly to determine who is awake on watch for each encounter. Play them out. If no encounters happen, the night passes uneventfully. Hooray. When the party wakes up, you do it again. We always celebrated when the game master, when it's night, everybody's asleep. the game master rolls some dice and then says, all right, it's the next morning. You wake up. Yes, we woke up. We woke up the next morning. We made it through the night. We woke up. Yes, everyone celebrates. Being lost. So what happens if the party is lost? Well, you can handle it in a few ways. The easy way is to assume that each day of travel doesn't count as any progress. When the party makes camp, log 0 progress. However, you should also still have the navigator roll a check. Well, you should roll secretly. If this check succeeds, the navigator will recognize the party has become lost the next morning as the party is starting to set out. Otherwise, the party will just continue to make no progress every day. That's a pretty easy system. It seemed like the One Ring did not have getting lost. So what happens if you get lost? You're not making progress. Oh, we were going in circles. We moved in the wrong direction. Sometimes he's probably going to talk about if it matters where you actually end up, because you could stumble into, like the enemy fortress or something, in which case you would all of a sudden know where you are and that you're not where you're supposed to be. But the fact that you were moving in the wrong direction would suddenly become significant. Lynn says, I notice he doesn't address how to determine who is awake to sound the alarm during a nighttime encounter. He says to determine that randomly. He says, if the party really, remember the possibilities for detection and ambush. Roll randomly to determine who is awake on watch for each encounter. So if there's an evening encounter, just roll randomly to figure out who happened to be on watch at that time. I felt the same way about the One Ring handling journeying, but it could just be that I'm still a bit tired this morning. But this just feels a bit different. Well, I mean, that way it does. Okay. However, you can handle it in a few other ways. First of all, if the party travels in one direction long enough, they're going to discover an unexpected feature. They will hit a river, a new type of terrain, a lake, a road. If you drew a map, determine randomly what they will hit and where they hit it, or just pick something. Assume they travel in a straight line in a random direction from the middle of wherever terrain route they were in. Again, use your best judgment. Likewise, if the party knows the trip should have taken 3 to 5 days and they hit day 7, they're going to realize they are lost, right? That's a reason to have some type of expectation for the players about how long it's going to take in advance. So I also like the One Ring setup, but I think it needs some modification, and I think he's providing this because that's an important recognition that you're lost right there. So you would need to have some idea about how long you're expecting this journey to take, and all of a sudden, okay, now you're not there, so you know you're lost. Alternatively, each day they travel while lost, roll a d6 while logging their process. On a 1, they manage to travel in the right direction and log process normally. On a 5 or 6, they're losing ground and subtract how much progress they would have made based on their route. For anything else, add no progress. Once the party realizes they're lost, see, this also could be a high-level kind of thing, because if you're, what I meant by that is that as your characters increase in level, they're going to be better at making these type of navigation checks. So the navigation check, the DC of the navigation checks in some areas could become a reason why only high-level adventurers go over there. Zero the Blade. But my question is, what happens if a party has a map, as a map maker, and a skilled navigator? It sounds like your DC would get a lot easier. I think. Like if you're a skilled navigator and you have a map, then it sounds like you're getting a high-level bonus to the navigation DCs. I think. Shadowlight. Welcome, Shadowlight. Shadowlight says, Night Watch aspect is unique and needed. Remember my GM cousin using the Who is Awake at Night roll during nightly encounters to add excitement during the game. Yeah, so that's an easy, I think that's what we're saying here, is that's an easy way to do that. Rather than have, yes, some players get really bogged down in, okay, now I'm going to be on watch for this amount of time, then it's going to be you, and then from this hour to this hour, it's going to be you. Just skip that. If everybody's taking a watch and everybody agrees, then the game master will just roll to determine who was up and who was on watch at that time. Okay, so alternatively, we said that once the party realizes they are lost, either because they hit a feature they shouldn't have, or because they realized they've been traveling too long, or because the navigator figured out they got lost someplace, they need to figure out a new plan. They might pick a direction they know will lead them to something. We'll head north until we find a river, or we'll keep traveling in this direction until we find the edge of the forest. They might try to find a landmark to make it toward. We know that the mountain peak is to the southeast. If we keep toward it, we should be able to find our way back to the road. Or can I climb a tree and see if I can spot the lake from here? They might try to backtrack. Can we follow our own trail back home? You can resolve each of those simply by assuming the party starts a new route and figuring it out accordingly. At this point, the party is no longer lost on the new route. The important thing is the party can't just get unlost. They need to have an alternative plan once they are lost. Otherwise, they will just keep wandering. Random encounters. When designing random encounters, it's important to note a few things. So random encounters and getting them right are important. So I wonder what he's going to say about this. Multiverse DM says, I often hike in the wilderness a mile high or greater, but I rarely get lost, only in the rocky sand washes of Arizona near the Colorado River. They are endless mazes. High ground is the key anywhere. All right, let's see about random encounters. First of all, random encounters represent all of the potential dangers and hazards an area might present to travelers. It's not just a list of combat encounters. In fact, even when it's a list of encounters, it's a list of potential encounters. Remember, the party might evade the encounter, or the encounter might evade the party. You don't even have to assume that every encounter is hostile, though I advise against using random encounters for friendly encounters. I advise against using random encounters for friendly encounters. Bandits might be willing to let the party go for a price, especially if the party looks powerful and they aren't sure of the odds. Some monsters might ignore the party if the party throws some food at them before retreating. Orcs might trade threats and insults with the party and social interaction, which is another article that he wrote, with each side trying to get the other to back down and go away. Some animals might merely threaten the party and try to frighten them away with their nest or other territory. Random encounters can also present hazards. Quicksand in swamps, flash floods in hills and badlands, booby traps in kobold territory. They can all be obstacles like rock falls across a road or washed out like a bridge. In general, the party should deal one or two of them a day, should deal with one or two of them a day, unless they start wandering through very dangerous territory. And that means that 3 days of travel is roughly equivalent to a short dungeon adventure. Keep that in mind as you plan. So he says, okay, that's interesting. So he says 3 days of travel is roughly equivalent to a short dungeon adventure. That is important to keep in mind as planning, especially if you're trying to get travel and an adventure done in a single session. Your encounter should be, if you're not under that constraint, that's something good. In fact, that you could plan a game around that. So you want 3 days of travel to be roughly equivalent to a short dungeon adventure. Okay, I can go with that. Your encounter should be interesting, but not complicated. Focus on single creatures or small groups of identical creatures. And honestly, instead of a list of encounters, you can just have a small bestiary of creatures that you can mix and match easily to get the results you want. In goblin territory, you can get a lot of mileage by mixing and matching goblin skirmishers, goblin archers, and giant spider pets in different combinations. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is the party will have the opportunity to rest and recover more frequently in the wild and will probably encounter fewer encounters than a typical dungeon day. To compensate, it's important to skew your combat encounters toward the hard end of the difficulty curve. Oh, that's interesting. Because it's more difficult to rest in the middle of a dungeon, but it's easier to rest when you're out in the wilderness. So to compensate, skew your combat encounters toward the hard end of the difficulty curve. Use the guidelines in your particular edition of D&D or Pathfinder to up the difficulty. Hard should be the baseline difficulty for wilderness encounters to keep them meaningful. And especially if you're going to have a small number of them. That's why I had said, well, if you're only going to have one, go ahead and put that one encounter at the most difficult location, or most difficult monster to fight or whatever it is, and just assume they got past the other ones. Let's go ahead and go to the most difficult one. Discoveries. It can be tough to come up with discoveries on the fly. but the party should only encounter 1 or 2 during the entire trip unless they are wandering through an ancient kingdom lousy with ruins. Discoveries are basically just encounters that somehow bait the party into checking them out, but most of them should offer some kind of reward. So that has to be it, because you don't want what I was saying up there. Well, do you waste a day checking it out, or do you ignore it? It seems like unless there is some kind of reward, which is exactly what he's got here, the right answer would be to ignore it, and you don't want the party to always do that. So most of them should offer some type of reward or cool thing you might get if you do that. Yes. Either something interesting or something valuable or both. An old ruined tower with an intact cellar, for example, might have a strong box in the basement with some money or other trinkets, but it might be protected by a booby trap. Or something living in the cellar. An ancient shrine might reward an offering with a minor blessing or boon and might punish anyone taking on offering from the bowl. These discoveries are your chance to give the players something to interact with if they are willing to waste time. Remember, if the rat survives the trap, he ends up with some free cheese for his troubles. You need 1 or 2 discoveries for every 3 days of travel, more than likely. But it's always good to have a pile of them in case you ever need one on the fly. Sounds like a good job for a deck of cards. Probably somebody's made that. A few tweaks for 5th edition. As a final note, I need to point out that D&D 5e does a few things that absolutely, as he always writes over here, some chance you're having a good, screw up any chance of having good, engaging wilderness travel fun. First of all, the basic encumbrance rules that assume you can carry 15 times your strength without breaking a sweat completely removes any difficulty in carrying food supplies. We've talked about that before, that that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition happens to have some of the worst encumbrance rules that I've seen, because it implies that you are supposed to be tracking encumbrance, like, pound by pound, but that it also tells you that, hey, by the way, we've made the amount you can carry so high that you're probably never going to have to worry about it anyway. That's the worst of all worlds. So that's being recognized here. I suggest you use the variant rules for encumbrance found on the PHB 176. Second of all, drop all of that activity while traveling BS. Drop all that activity while traveling BS. It disguises non-choices as choices and drags out the process of setting out. Assume the party will always forage if moving slow enough, and that everyone is always paying attention. My system is streamlined to skip a lot of bookkeeping until the end of the day. Likewise, D&D 5e is very generous with foraging. Screw that too. And while you're on the subject, some classes and backgrounds have features that also completely ruin any engagement to be gotten from travel. That's true. We encountered that with Journey to the Tree of Sorrows. And if you want travel to be meaningful and to have potential options, there are things like, isn't the ranger, if once the ranger reaches a certain level, you can just never get lost. You're just never lost. Okay. The Outlander background in particular offers the Wanderer feature that amounts to never getting lost and always foraging for the entire party. Replace that with a mechanical bonus to navigation and foraging. Like the Ranger class feature, Natural Explorer trivializes absolutely every aspect of wilderness travel, virtually guaranteeing that it becomes a Final Fantasy game of just plodding through random encounters and not sweating anything else. And much of that is tied to the specific boring rules of overland travel baked into 5e. Instead, change it to having advantage on navigation so the party moves at a fast pace, it cancels disadvantage, or have advantage on perception while traveling. So if the party moves at a fast pace, yada, 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 and foraging yielding enough food for the second person, basically covering one other party member's failure. All right. Sounds pretty good. Multiverse DM says 5e eliminates the consideration of trade across the multiverse, the movement of goods in extra-dimensional ways. Multiverse DM says that's the missing element to the pound per pound situation. Oh, my camera just went down. Let me see if I can fix that. I tell you can still hear me, but I did just lose my camera. I'm also beach balling over here. Let me see if I can get that back. Okay. Okay. I'm on the Mac, so I'm beach balling, the equivalent of the hourglass. Let's see if I can just keep going here, because okay, so that got through that. We've still got some time though. If I can actually get a browser window up. Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm back. Let's go over to his other section on travel, getting wilderness right. Let me see if I can look that up. Angry GM getting wilderness right. Well, I may not be able to. My whole computer may be jammed up. Angry GM getting wilderness right. Because he came back to this topic. Here it is. Okay. He came back to this topic a while later, like 5 years later. I'll try one more time to get the camera operational. All right, never mind. Can't do it. How to get wilderness right. So here we go. Long article ahead. So, okay, so we can start today and we can continue this. So this is a beast. Okay. How to get there from here. Angry. How do you handle wilderness travel? How do you resolve it and play it out at the table? I get that question a lot. And today, I actually think you might be ready for the answer. And I'm going to tell you how exactly I resolve wilderness travel at the table. Or how I would, anyway, if I were running D&D 5e. Because I know that's the system you're all running. But it's not the one I'm running. I run the best edition. It doesn't matter, though. The process is the same. There's a lot to cover here. And I don't want to split this crap into 2 articles. I just want to get this done. I want to be thorough. So I'm even going to provide not 1, not 2, but 3, not 3, but 4 examples of treks that could happen at my table. Yes, 4. Trouble is, that ain't going to leave me a lot of time. Let's get to this. Knowing the world. Okay, let's just start here. If you want the wilderness to be an actual thing in your game, you've got to know it. Know the wilderness. Know it accurately. You have to have a map, a good map. A good map has an accurate scale, shows the terrain at every point, shows all the important where all the destinations are, and shows a few prominent territories. A good map doesn't have to be pretty. No one gives a crap if it looks like art, because no one but you will ever see it, because we're talking about the super secret, accurate, and precise for your eyes only map of the world. Never show it to the players. A good map is accurate and precise, but it doesn't have everything. First, only mark crap that you know exists and that you know can exist at a certain place. You can update the map as the game goes on and add more locations. Secondly, only plot the big crap. Most features and destinations. There's all sorts of tiny things all over the world. There's streams, ponds, hamlets, farms, roadside shrines, caves, insubstantial ruins, monster lairs. None of that crap goes on the map. That's the stuff of wilderness encounter and complication and flavor text. Generally, if it ain't a place the players will spend more than a few minutes at one time, don't plot it. And if a minor nothing turns into a destination, plot it then. Back to what makes a good map. You need scale so you can easily determine in-world distances and travel times so that you can plot the party's exact location in the world at any time. But yes, because yes, you have to do that. You keep track of where the party is in the dungeon, right? Well, why wouldn't you do the same thing in the overworld? You need terrain so you can determine what the world around the characters looks like, but also because terrain affects visibility, travel time, and all kinds of random monsters that will attack the players, whether certain characters can use certain abilities and so on. The D&D 5e world includes 7 terrain types: Arctic, coast, desert, forest, grassland, mountain, and swamp. At the very least, you must divide your map into those 7 kinds of terrain. You can subdivide the terrain types if you want to. You can create cold deserts and moorlands and differentiate between swamps and marshes, but make sure you decide which subtype it falls under, which types, because terrain is important for some of the D&D rules. The easy and the best way to handle this is to get yourself some hex paper and some hex maps. Pick a scale per hex and put 1 kind of terrain in each hex. One type of terrain per hex does make this easy. I highly recommend the Adventurer, Conqueror, King regional map templates. Really, let's find out what that is. Regional hex maps. Hex maps at multiple scales for your campaign adventures. Let's see. Well, for some reason that isn't loading. All right, we'll look at that later. Anyway, you might want to check those out. Multiverse DM says, I use both sides of the Chessex map for that reason. Creating a good campaign map is outside of the scope of this article. There's a lot to consider. Climate, geology, how far apart the settlement should be, and so on. I'll briefly tell you how I handle that crap, though. I handle it by absolutely not giving any kind of crap at all about it. It never matters. I just draw a map that looks fun. Maps also show locations. I talked about those above. And maps show territories. Territories are regions controlled or patrolled. There we go. Hang on. I'm going to show you that I just finally got this Adventurer, Conqueror, and King thing up. So this is the map template that he recommends right here. I downloaded it. So this is what I got. Adventurer, Conqueror, King system. Area map. So we've got this large hex that is divided up into multiple smaller hexes. We used to do that when I was talking about playing that island game with my uncle. So there were hexes, and then each hex was subdivided into smaller hexes so that we could know the size of the island, or know our location on the island. Smallest hex size, 55 feet. I wonder why 55 feet. 6 miles, 24 miles, 1,320 feet. $1,320 feet. No, it's a quarter mile. Okay, yes. I was like 5,280 feet is a mile. And then here, so I guess this, well, I'm not sure, area mapped. But then here we've got additional hexes, large hexes, and then numbers of smaller hexes. And then we do it again here and again. So this must be a system for nested hexagons and plotting your location. It looks like this is we've got more complicated systems if you're actually trying to map a projected region. We looked at that in the AD&D World Builders Guide. But this looks like it's just working entirely on a 2-dimensional plane, so that probably makes that easy. Yeah, he doesn't specify, though, right? He probably would someplace. James says, what qualifies a map as being fun? Let me take that down. Let me go back over to the article. Okay. So maps also show locations. I talked about those above. And maps show territories. Territories are regions controlled or patrolled by some non-civilized entity. Regions big enough to warrant inclusion on the map. You've got the territory of the apex predators like dragons, the stomping grounds for the savage races like orcs, the stomping grounds for tribal and insular groups of wood elves and human barbarians. Territories ain't a thing that exists in the core D&D rules, so I'll explain a bit more. Territories are particularly dangerous regions of the wilderness with special complication lists of their own, usually related to the controller. When the party enters a territory, there's a chance they'll notice it based on intelligence checks keyed to a particular proficiency or wisdom perception checks, or because it's super obvious and impossible to miss. Zero the Blade says, seems like a good system of hex grid if world and dungeon. Might have to try it because I use squares and not hexes when making maps. Yeah, I'm going to have to look at that in more detail too and understand its system. When a party enters a territory, there's a chance they notice it based on intelligence. Okay, because we said that. Or because it's impossible to miss. Orcs mark their land with bloody orc signs on trees and skulls on pikes. You don't miss that. But recognizing the signs of a green dragon's hunting ground might require an intelligence arcana check. If the party does anything in a territory, travel, camp, search, adventure, it's reckless. They're just inviting trouble. Here's a good, useful GM map. It's from my AOWG, sort of. So here, okay, he's using this system right here. Easy saying what's in there. So we got mountains, we got forests. I noticed here that he's got the river here that does not go through hexes. When you're talking about on this level, it does make things easy if the rivers at this level of granularity never run through a hex. So it's always, okay, you approach the river. If you're going to cross the river, then you go into another hex. You're not having to adjudicate you're on this side of the hex or you're on this side of the hex. This side of the river within one hex or the other side of the river within one hex. You do that in Mighty Empires, though. It doesn't have labels so that's easier to read and add stuff to. I keep a list of the locations by numerical code. Notice how that each hex has a numerical code. Yeah, and I was wondering what type of system it uses to determine those numeric codes. But yes, every hex gets a numeric code, which is, if you know the hex code, you know exactly where it is in the world. Which, like I said, I've done before when we were playing with my uncle. There are two territories in the woods between High Grove and Perrin Mill. The smaller one belongs to the orcs of the Burnt Eye tribe. The larger one's a Green Dragon's hunting ground. On map scale. I said I wasn't going to explain a lot, but I will explain this. The best map scale is 6 miles per hex. It's the absolute best. Why? It's because 6 is half of 12. And 12 is easily divisible by 2, 3, and 4. So it's easy to compute travel times for PCs who generally travel 2, 3, or 4 miles per hour. And it's easy to cut travel speeds down to 3/4 or half or 1/4 to account for rugged terrain. The math is just super easy when you use multiples or fractions of 12. But 6 miles is also a great scale because on a clear day in an open terrain, the horizon's about 3 miles away. That is, an average-sized PC passing through a hex of clear terrain, they can see the big obvious stuff on the edges of the hex, so visibility becomes easy. By the way, if you don't have a good intuitive grasp of visibility like I do, you can fake it by referring to this excellent article entitled How Far Can You See by someone named Ronnie over on the site Dungeon Master Assistance. It's a very good reference. In short, there's one correct scale for D&D maps. It's 6 miles to the hex. What the players know. You, as the GM, must know your world. You must be able to track players' movements through it, precisely. But your players don't get the benefit of that kind of precision. At best, the PCs have a crappy and inaccurate hand-drawn map of the world around which wasn't made using satellite imagery or precise surveying equipment. And worse, they have a vague idea of where crap is. The information mismatch is part of what makes a wilderness campaign or wilderness travel challenging and exciting, intense, and fun. The players do need some information, though. Otherwise, they can't plan for a trip. They need to approximate sense of scale and a basic understanding of terrain. That way, they can make guesses about how long they will be traveling through what type of terrain, unless they are traveling off the edge of the map and into the unknown. I like to give my players their own little map of the world because I'm just that nice. The map I give them is usually prettier, but also less accurate. I trace it off my own hex map. I even update it as we play, because I can be nice when I want to be. The player map either represents an actual physical object in the game world or represents the player's understanding of the world. Basically, all the places they know and how to get to. So, yes, an in-game map or out-of-game map. The Game Master's map is out of game. Out of universe. The Game Master's map is out of universe. The player's map might be an in-universe map. Lynn says, oddly enough, I use 10-kilometer hexes, which is about 6 miles. So here is an example of the player's map based on the hex map above. Now, there is a scale on that map, but it's kind of crappy. I drew the scale bar freehandish so it wouldn't quite line up properly, and it's measured in leagues because that's an in-gamey sounding measurement. And also because it's a convenient unit of measurement. Traditionally, a league represented the distance an unladen person could hike over clear terrain or along a road in 1 hour. It was about 3 miles. That 4-league scale thing, conveniently, that's how far a 5e D&D party can travel at a normal pace in a few hours. Whenever I show off my maps, I get a bunch of people pissing and moaning about how they can't draw maps because they suck at drawing maps. That's a fair point. A stupid point, but a fair one. I mean, the only way to get good at drawing maps is to draw maps. So if you don't draw maps because you're not good at it, you never will be. That said, players have no standards. They don't deserve your best work anyway. So if the best you can do is something like this, and here is our example here, that works totally fine. That's my same map, but I crapped that thing out in 10 minutes. I just didn't bother labeling it. That said, if you noobs want to actually get good at the whole mapping thing, check out Jared Blando's instructional books. I've seen these books. How to draw fantasy maps in RPGs. How to draw fantasy art in RPG maps. Fantasy Maker. Yeah. I don't think I've ever read one. I don't think I have any of them. I don't think I've read one, but I have seen that. Navigating the world. So you've got a map and the players have theirs. It's time to do some actual trekking. Every wilderness trip starts with as a plan in some stupid player's head. Then the player turns to you and says, we go to wherever, some location, and then they're off. Except they're not, because the heroes can't just click a dot and say, we go there. This ain't an Indiana Jones movie. It ain't Skyrim. The best the heroes can actually do to get from one place to another is to strike out in a particular direction. Try to keep true to that direction and hope they end up where they want to. Or they can follow a big, obvious feature like a road or a river or shoreline or a tree line or walk directly toward the tallest mountain in a range or sail along the coast. Or they can follow vague directions and landmarks, like head out of town along Yoel's Landing Road and walk for an hour until you see a big rock that looks like a pig humping another smaller pig. Okay, stand on Pig Hump Rock. He won't mind. And look around. You should see just a little pond in the distance. Head to the pond. Then follow the creek that flows out of the pond until. The point is, a wilderness trip consists of attempts to travel in straight lines, to follow existing features, or to follow vague directions and landmarks. Some combination of those three things. And when it comes to traveling in straight lines, the best the heroes can usually do is travel in cardinal directions or in between halfway directions, like north or northwest, but not 17 degrees east of north. The wilderness travel turn. Wilderness travel plays out as one or more arbitrary game turns. Each turn comprises an attempt by the players to reach a destination or complete one leg of a complex trip. How will you resolve a wilderness travel turn? Let me explain. 1. Plan the trip. As noted, the wilderness travel starts with one of the idiots saying, we go to wherever. And now you know that's actually not a proper action declaration. It's incomplete. You, therefore, cannot resolve it. The reason it's incomplete is it's just a statement of an intended outcome. It's basically the travel equivalent of diplomacy the guard to get in. It doesn't include the approach. The party wants to end up wherever. Fine. How are they getting there? Walking? By what route? At a minimum, to resolve travel in D&D 5e, the players must have a direction, a pace, and a formation. Okay, that would also be important if that's like, you have these options, you got to understand this, and in order to declare a travel, you got to declare these things: direction, pace, and formation. Okay. And the party members can undertake different tasks while they travel. Directions can consist of straight line travel in cardinal directions or directly towards specific locations if the party knows where they're at. Alternatively, the party can follow a large and visible feature across the landscape. Alternatively, if the party has a set of vague directions and landmarks, they can follow those. And the party can also follow some other creature or party's trail across the wilderness. The party can travel at a fast, normal, or slow pace. That determines their basic travel speed, what tasks they can undertake, and provide bonuses or penalties for certain roles. Formation, as described in the PHP, doesn't mean an exact single file line. People don't travel like that. And they tend to move around as they travel, drafting in and out of conversations, spread out to forage, tightening up in dangerous situations, and so on. so you establish who's in what rank as described in the PHB. No more detail than that is needed or wanted or useful. Travel tasks are also described in the PHB. I don't need to rehash that, but I will point out that if the party is not following a big visible feature, someone needs to navigate. Traveling in straight, true lines naturally across nature is actually really tricky, and even small deviations can send you off by course by miles. Following vague directions and landmarks is also tricky. It also takes one oversight. All it takes is one oversight or deviation, and then you're lost. Following a creature's trail doesn't require navigation, but it does require tracking. Most trails are actually fairly subtle and easy to use. Oh, and easy to lose. Most trails are actually fairly subtle and easy to lose. By the way, the party's navigator doesn't have to be at the front of the party. People can point and talk. It's fine. But I usually require trackers to travel in the front rank so the party doesn't ruin the trail ahead of them. Anyway, this is all you need to establish before you resolve anything. Where the party's going, how they are navigating, who's where, and who's doing what. It's all a good idea to establish how long the party thinks they'll be traveling for and the supplies they've got on hand to make the trip. Multiverse DM says, direction, pace, and formation make a great trio. Lynn says, personally, I can be bribed with dark chocolate. So you can be, that's what would cause Lynn to be nice when he needs to be. Step 2, plot the projected route. Now that you've established where the party is going and how, you can plot their route on your own secret map. Basically, figure out what a successful trip will look like. How long will it take? What terrain does it pass through? Does it go through any dangerous territory? That kind of thing. Just draw a little pencil line or highlighter line on your map. Pro tip, if you put your secret GM map in a vinyl sheet protector, you can write on it with dry erase markers without ruining it. It's your secret GM. If your secret GM map exists on a computer, you can print out copies and mark them up however you want. Do not share this with your players, though. They don't get to see the accurate map and the projected route. They don't know what they don't know or don't. They know what they know. They know what they know or they don't. Step 3, can the trip fail? Trekking across the wilderness is an action, right? Or a series of actions. That means it's got to be resolved as an action, which means you've got to decide whether it can succeed or whether it can fail. Presumably, you've gotten this far. The trip is at least possible. But what does that trip mean? What does a trip mean to fail? There's a crap ton of ways a trip can end with the party not reaching their intended destination. They can die along the way. They can run out of supplies and turn back. They can discover something along the way and spend days plundering it. But in the context of arbitrary game turns, those are interrupted and aborted tasks. In D&D, wilderness trips can fail for one of two reasons. Either because the party got lost or because the party failed to spot their destination and went right past it. When I say the trip fails, you've got to understand precisely what that means. That means the wilderness travel turn ends, but the players aren't where they meant to be. If they're lost, they're somewhere in the wilderness and have to figure out what to do next. And if they miss the destination, they're somewhere in the wilderness and have to figure out what to do next, assuming they've realized they're lost and missed their destination. If the party's following a big, obvious feature, they can't get lost. If they've got a ranger navigating them through his favored terrain, they can't get lost. If they've got an outlander navigating them between locations the outlander has visited before, they can't get lost. Otherwise, they can get lost. Now, I think in the other article, he recommended changing that. But this is probably according to the rules as written in D&D. And it takes a wisdom survival check to see if they don't get lost. If the party's headed for a big, obvious thing located in reasonably clear terrain or that rises high enough above the terrain to be visible, they can't miss it. Otherwise, they might. Like Isengard, I guess. Or Barad-dûr. They might not see their destination, depending on how visible it is from miles away. Usually, the party's within 3 miles of a building or settlement, and they're not in the forest, they can see their destination. If the destination is small, though, like a monument or a ruined foundation or cave, it's in a forest or particularly sunk into a swamp, they might fail to spot it. Most trips can be resolved in a single navigation check or non-check, and a quick glance at passive perception scores to see if they spot their destination. But some trips are more complicated. The party can travel in a direction for a few days to intercept a feature and then follow that feature. Or they can travel in a direction across the plains, into the forest, up to the hills, and then follow a specific large feature, and upon reaching that feature, follow some vague directions and landmarks from an old treasure map. Tracking is a trickier beast. Time and weather can change the tracking. Tracking is a trickier beast. Time and weather can change the tracking DC, but the basic rules are the same. Whether the rules are for resolving an action of change, one wilderness travel turn ends and another begins. If a trip requires multiple checks or the same check under different conditions, you break it into multiple wilderness travel turns and resolve each turn in turn. Obviously. I hope that's obvious. Okay, so determining the wilderness travel turn's success. Once you determine whether the trip can fail and whether or not you break it into parts, take a die and roll any navigation or tracking check secretly behind the screen. I might actually try to get the camera back. There we go. How about that? My computer reset the camera software. So now we're back. Good to see you again. Determine the wilderness travel turn's success. Once you're determined whether the trip can fail and whether or not you have to break it into parts, take a die and roll any navigation or tracking check secretly behind the screen. That'll tell you whether the party follows the intended route or not. If the party follows their intended route and at least ends up on the right hex, check to see if the location is missable. Compare the DC to notice the location to each alert party member's passive perception score. Even though navigators usually don't get to use their passive perception score while navigating, see the PHB, I do allow them to notice the destination because what's the point of all that navigating if you're not looking for the destination? You can totally miss a goblin ambush, though. If the party fails to follow the intended route, they're lost. If the party fails to notice their destination, they've missed the destination. Don't say anything to the players yet, though. They're still working behind the. You're still working behind the screen. Step 4A, you're lost. If the party gets lost while navigating, the GM says they travel 1d6 hours in the wrong direction and then get a wisdom survival check to recognize they've been going in the wrong direction. If they succeed, they know they're lost. If they fail, they travel another 1d6 hours in the wrong direction and then get another wisdom survival check. When the party's lost, I usually send them traveling in the wrong direction by one hex side. I roll randomly just to decide. Each time they fail to recognize they're lost, I determine a new wrong direction based on the direction they were traveling. Meanwhile, I keep accurate track based on the number of hours they've been traveling and the pace where they actually are. The wilderness travel turn doesn't end until the party realizes they're lost, either by a successful wilderness survival check or because the players recognize something is wrong. Like they come out of the forest and they aren't at their destination, or they hit a map feature they weren't aiming for, or the trip takes longer than they were expecting. Meanwhile, keep track of how much time passes and where the party travels and things like that. Step 4B, missing the destination. When a party misses the destination, they've walked right past it. They didn't even notice. Whoops, sucks to be them. The problem with missing the destination is the characters have no chance of noticing that they missed the destination. There's no, oh crap, moment of recognizing the party's headed in the wrong direction. Instead, the party just keeps blundering along in the same direction, expecting their destination to pop up in front of them. When the party misses their destination, they just keep going in the same direction, stuck in an endless travel until the players themselves realize that something went wrong. Like they end up in the wrong terrain, or hit an unexpected feature, or travel for longer than anticipated. As you would with a lost party, keep track of a party's actual location on the map once they miss their destination and when something changes, terrain, arrival at a feature, or they pass their allotted trip, or are running low on supplies. Interrupt them and see what they do. How much more have we got into this? Searching the wilderness. A lot here. Very much a lot. Let's go through 5 and 6. Then we might stop for the day. Because that says back to start. You resolve the travel turn. Okay. Step 5, determine how the trip plays out and what happens along the way. When a trip succeeds or whether it fails, make whatever other dice rolls you need to make to figure out what happens. Roll the time pool once it's time pool. We talked about that. That's going to another article of his. Roll the time pool once a day to determine if a complication arises at a random hour during that day, or wandering monster checks. If the party's foraging along the way, have them roll as many checks are needed to cover the travel time, or roll them yourself. If the party passes through something's territory, roll to see if they notice. If they don't notice, make some extra time pool or wandering monster checks. If they pass interesting features, determine if they notice them, and take note of any planned encounters that happen along the way. Some of this crap is just mechanical resolution. When the party's foraging along the way, for example, I just rolled to see how much of a turn that each day is. How much they turn up each day. I just roll, if they're foraging, I just roll to see how much they turn up each day. Some of this crap's going to interrupt the trip, though. It won't end the travel turn per se, but it provides a distraction. Some of it may change the turn in the middle, like if the party notices they've passed into orc territory and decide to change their route. Oh, remember when I told you to find out how much time the party thinks the trip will take and how much food they've got? Take note of that when they hit the projected time and when they've consumed half, 3/4, or all of their supplies. Just don't say that to the party yet. Just take notes. Figure out what's going to happen when. They should be noticing that, though, if they're using up resources. Step 6, narrate and apply the results from one interruption to the next. Now that you know whether the trip succeeds and how long it takes, you know all the crap that's happening along the way, you can narrate the trip and apply the results. If nothing interesting happens during the wilderness turn, you can just tell them how much time passes and what the terrain looks like as they pass through it, and tell them how many days of food to mark off and crap like that. You can also stretch things out a bit to narrate transitions between different terrain types, even if nothing interesting happens. I usually narrate the passage of the first and second day to give a sense of time passing, something like this. You set out at dawn and travel through the farmland around the city. By noon, though, you've left the walled-off farm fields behind, and you're moving through rolling grassy hills with occasional stands of trees. Night falls, and you camp under the stars in the middle of the plains. More trees and brush dot the landscape as you travel through the second day, and they grow closer together. Just before evening, you spy the thick tree line of the forest and find a convenient place to make camp at the forest's edge. The 3 days you spend trekking through the forest are rough, slow going. Most of the trees are small and widely spaced, allowing copious underbrush to cover ground in a tangle. It's a relief when you emerge on the final leg of your journey. The road's within half an hour walk of the tree's edge, and you reach the outskirts of the village by evening on the 6th day. Mark off 6 days of supplies. If you took note of any interruptions, complications, encounters, obstacles, interesting sights, and distractions, the decisions to enter dangerous territory, whatever, narrate it on the first one and then play it out. After it's done, if the party resumes their trip, narrate to the next interruption. Otherwise, if they suddenly abort or change their trip, well, that's the start of the new wilderness turn. Fortunately, you know exactly where they are in the world and can plan out the new trip. Usually, though, the players just carry on. If the party supplies are running low, or if they've hit their projected timeline for a trip, they're realizing they're lost, there are interruptions. Treat this as such and see what the party does. It's the 6th day of your trip. You expected to reach the village today, but as the sun descends toward the western horizon and the sunset blankets the land in crimson light, you see no sign of civilization before you. And that's it. You've resolved the wilderness turn. The party's either at their destination, or they're at the start of a new leg of their trip, or they're lost, and only you know where they are. If the party's finished a single leg of their trip, but everything's going as planned, the rest of the trip's already planned. You can go right ahead and start to resolve the next leg. You don't even need to talk to the players. That's a relief, right? But before I launch into the actual examples and then end this crap, there are 2 other issues I want to bring to your attention. Searching the wilderness and traveling as an adventure. How much time have we got? Let's go down so that we would start with examples if we want to continue with examples later. But let's go through searching the wilderness and is travel an adventure. And then the next thing that comes up is examples. That sounds pretty reasonable. Searching the wilderness. What if the party wants to travel to a location, but they only have a vague idea of where it is? What if they missed their destination, realized it, and want to backtrack and search out the location? As an arbitrary game turn, the party can search the wilderness. They can fan out and move slowly across an area looking for a thingy. It's no different than searching a dungeon room. It's a really big dungeon room. The party can search an arbitrarily large area. The bigger the area, the more time it's going to take. Generally, I assume it takes the party an hour to search a 6-mile hex of open terrain, or 2 hours to search a 6-mile hex of rugged terrain. If they search a bigger area, it takes more time. If the area is in dangerous territory, it's a reckless search. And reckless, that meant that you're going to roll those time dice. So this goes to the time pool that we were talking about in a previous article and on a previous morning grind. Otherwise, the exchange is something like this. PC, we know the shrine's somewhere in these plains. We want to search for it. GM, you want to search the plains, like all the plains? PC, no, well, maybe, if we have to, but look, takes out the player map. We know the shrine's probably in this area and the river curves about it. East of the road here, can we search that area? GM looks at his hex map and counts the hexes. Yeah, okay, that'll take most of the day, probably, fine. We search until nightfall, spiraling out from where we are. Okay, got it. Just get the party to define the search parameters, figure out the area they're covering, roll the check, and based on how far away the location is from them, decide how much time the search actually takes. The GM says it's late afternoon. A chilly wind blows as you crest a grassy ridgeline. Peering out across the grasslands to the southwest, you spy a small gray blot in the grasslands. It looks like a small building about 2 miles away. Is travel an adventure? You might have noticed that I'm a big fan of resolving big, complicated things in the smallest number of arbitrary game turns as possible. Travel 3 days through a forest? Fine, 1 roll. Travel a month to the next city? No roll needed. Search an entire forest for 1 ruined structure? Fine, roll 1 die and a week worth of wilderness survival. Done and done. Of course, surprises and interruptions do come up. The party gets lost sometimes or misses their destination, and that crap might change the equation and lead to aborted wilderness travel turns. That's why you resolve travel turns until the party knows they've succeeded, until they know they failed, until something changes, or until they give up, right? That might seem crazy, given that I started all this by saying that it's all to make travel matter, right? It's there to make wilderness travel seem significant, exciting. How the hell can I say what I'm telling you to How the hell can I say that when I'm telling you to resolve months of travel through the wilderness with a single die roll and a paragraph of travelogue flavor text? The thing about this makes travel significant. The thing is this crap makes travel significant because the player's choices and plans and guesses matter, because they can get things wrong, because they can succeed or fail, and because their failures can cost them resources, and because sometimes random, unexpected crap can happen along the way. But making wilderness travel exciting, making it an adventure or part of an adventure, takes more than just resolving the trip. And lots of GMs forget this. When you're designing a dungeon adventure, you don't just draw a map and then resolve exploring the dungeon with some random monster rolls, do you? No, you put some thought into where you put some crap where the players will stumble into it. You plan some actual encounters and obstacles and challenges. All the rules for managing light resources and wandering monsters, those are constraints and consequences and complications and chaos. They aren't the adventure. When the party is just hiking between towns on the map, that's the equivalent of just walking from one dungeon room to another. It's a transition. Roll the random encounter checks, expend the resources, and move on to the next good part. But when the party's trying to find some ancient shrine whose location they only have a vague idea about, in the heart of dangerous territory so they can plunder it for treasure, that's part of the adventure. The adventure is like part 1, finding the swampy ruins of swampiness. 2, plundering the ruins. Don't rely on the random travel rules BS to carry half the weight of the adventure. Plan some crap to happen along the way, the same way you plan out crap to happen in dungeon rooms. And look, when you're putting adventurers in the wilderness, you aren't just deciding that the players run into certain obstacles or challenges at a certain point of their trip. You're not putting encounters in hexes. You're putting encounters in an adventure. Want to make the wilderness an exciting place to adventure? Write adventures in the wilderness. Okay, well, all right, then we would get into examples, but I might leave you to read those if you want to. But I think especially in that first article, there was a lot of good information about wilderness travel. But James says, but how interesting is failing and dying on the road? How fun is that? Well, I suppose that the counter question to that would be, how fun is dying in a dungeon? How interesting is failing and dying in a dungeon? Wouldn't it be, so I don't know. James says, I think this is why I preferred the One Ring. It didn't kill the whole party for no reason on the road. It added to the narrative, but it didn't just allow for a total TPK. All right. Well, I got things to do. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. It's Sunday, so make the most of it. Please, everybody, go forward, be creative, be constructive, have some games, play some games maybe. I will see you tomorrow. Later, everybody.